the bigger theme that we've been trying to grapple with at the COVID Action Network is this idea of tech and trust. So there's been a lot around sort of contact tracing apps and the changing relationships both at work and vis-a-vis our governments. And so looking to try and crowdsource solutions and ideas that can make people's lives easier and better in this new world. And yeah, that's those are the motivations behind the conversation. I guess everyone just go around, introduce yourselves. Burton, do you want to start?
Yeah, so my name is Burton Kelso. I'm the Chief Technology Expert at Integral. We provide on-site and remote tech support for homes and businesses here in the Kansas City metro area and of course across the country remotely. Our whole goal is just to make technology easier for everybody. We're not the geeks. We're more of a team of people who love computers and technology. So, I mean, we love technology. We've read all the manuals, and our goal is to make technology fun and easy to use for everyone.
Super. James?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jack, and thanks for that, Burton. So my name is James Neufeld. I'm the CEO and founder of a startup called SAM. SAM is essentially a crisis event detection platform. We've developed and built an AI engine over the last couple of years to essentially work with a number of data partners to spot early signals and trends within large data sets. So very specifically things like Twitter, Snapchat, other feeds of that nature, where a lot of these early signals can sometimes be first reported on the ground from an eyewitness, or some other kind of signal might be hidden within the big data world. So essentially we are an early signal system to spot emerging trends and problems such as the pandemic we find ourselves in.
Amazing. And Loren?
Yeah, so my name's Loren Appin. I'm COO and co-founder of Fishbowl. We're a workplace social network where verified employees from across different industries come together and discover, engage in relevant professional communities. Can be from finance professionals to physicians and teachers. We're open to many industries, and they're able to speak candidly and also anonymously about their work lives on the platform. And so it's been interesting because especially during this time, we talk about how Zoom has replaced kind of the meeting room. In many ways, Fishbowl has replaced the conversations happening in the hallways, around the break room, around the water cooler. And so, we've actually it's been interesting to kind of have a pulse on what's happening from a professional perspective during this time, especially too.
Absolutely. No, that's brilliant. First off, something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently is, although in each of our countries we'll have our frustrations with government responses and the slowness and fear of this like deadly disease that is spreading, but I wonder whether we would have been able to cope so well on a general scale if it weren't for our levels of connectivity, if it weren't for the internet. So if we could go around the room, just sort of like how the sort of on a top level connectivity, the internet, technology, how it has helped us survive this pandemic as a species worldwide. Go around the same way we did before. So Burton first.
Yeah, so obviously technology, I think, has helped people stay closely connected. So hopefully most communities have access to high-speed internet. So platforms like Zoom, even platforms like your Amazon Echo devices, Google Home devices, and even smartphone apps such as House Party, Skype, and Jitsi allow people to stay in close contact with each other. So I think the internet has really helped some people stay close and deal with social distancing. Also, it's made a large impact as far as allowing people to work remotely. So thank goodness that we've had technologies like, say, TeamViewer or Windows Remote Desktop or even Google Remote Desktop that allow us to work remotely and to stay productive. Because if we didn't have the high-speed internet, then we would run into a host of issues. And so part of the challenge in the US with the high-speed internet issue is that rural communities don't have access to high-speed internet. So I know for a fact that those communities have suffered because they don't have access to internet. In most situations, if you live in a smaller community, you can go to a larger town and work at, say, the local coffee shop or at McDonald's. But that necessarily hasn't been the case because unless the person that's living in a small community is able to drive up to, say, like the McDonald's and use their Wi-Fi in a parking lot, they're not going to be able to have access to internet capability. So for the most of us, it's good that we have high-speed internet and the technologies that go along with it.
James?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think I couldn't agree more with Burton on the, individual aspects. I mean, it's hard to imagine a world where we don't have this. It's an interesting concept to think of how for granted we take it and how normal it is for a lot of us, but for many still lagging behind. So it's an interesting, thought process around, how connected the world is in different parts of the world as well. I think the way that we look at it here on the SAM team more is the internet has been great. The connected world that we live in, a lot of the people we work with on the health authority side of things are kind of, the first responders aspect, particularly around this. It's helpful from a communication standpoint, absolutely. One of the challenges, and on the kind of the flip side, is we live in a very noisy world now too, right? I think we were kind of experiencing this, pre-COVID and definitely getting the full brunt of it now with a very noisy environment. And we can get into this, perhaps more throughout the conversation, but just this concept of, living very connected lives, it's been our saving grace, now I think in a large way, but it's also been very noisy. And the people we work with, get bombarded with a lot of messages and people saying, hey, you need to pay attention to this. This is a problem. And so, you live in a very busy environment where you're inundated with a lot of problems that you should pay attention to. How do you pay attention to the right one? Amongst all the noise, right, is an interesting, I think, side effect that is worth exploring to some degree in an ever-connected world, in which, no doubt we're more connected now than ever. But yeah, definitely agree with Burton. I think it's positive. A whole, even thinking about my own social life and my own kind of personal life would not have been the same without the connectivity.
Really. Loren, you got something?
Yeah. When I was first thinking about that question, you started with like how connected the world is, and if you abstract just the concept of the internet from it, we're connected through technology, through transportation, through flights, and you could argue that the way we've evolved now is maybe the virus wouldn't have spread, right? Because we have, there's this globalization, and it's an interesting take to just quickly look at it from that perspective. But looking at it specifically from, communications, internet, I think, yeah, overall, the rapid exchange of information and being able to adapt is something that is critical to know how to react. And so, for example, my wife is actually a physician on the front lines. She's in the hospital, she's in clinics, and physicians are constantly learning new information. People at the CDC, virologists are, and how is this information being disseminated? And so I know initially we thought the virus wasn't airborne at all. And now we're learning, okay, actually we should all be wearing masks, where initially we were saying, no, we shouldn't. So even on Fishbowl, what we're seeing is physicians sharing information about protocols, which is really interesting. But then also I think to what James and Burton were saying too, there's the individual level, and it comes down to mental health. And I think you were even saying that, Jack, where, like having access to Zoom and being able to speak with a family member and support them is something that is a way where we kind of are able to get through this pandemic. I think isolation is, something we should take seriously when it comes to mental health as well. And so I think there are aspects of this connectivity that, yes, allow us to react quickly about information, but also allow us to survive in terms of our inherent desire to just connect with people.
I think that's very, very true. It's been interesting, just going back to what you were saying, James, that having that overload of information all the time, and we become sort of both overwhelmed but desperate to find out more and more and more. And that is there was an amazing comic I saw of the sort of the pandemic from the virus's perspective. And if it had targeted any other animal, it would be able to just like spread across the social groups within that animal. But because we have that access to that information, and as Loren was saying, we then adapt to that information, we've actually transformed the way that we behave and evolved in real time to escape a new threat, which is a wonderful thing, thanks to a lot of that information, though, of course, some of it will be overwhelming. The other point I was thinking around is, so there's a lot of like, the workplace is changing forever. no one will ever go to university again in the same way. And to me, that's being framed as like a total transformation, a harsh revolution of the way that people will interact socially and in every way. But could it also be seen just as an acceleration of existing trends? Is anything that radical right now? So that's the question. So revolution or acceleration? Burton.
I think it's acceleration, because we've already started to see larger corporations making their workforce work from home. So I think with COVID, it is definitely pushed towards more of a mobile workforce. I mean, for years we've seen the trends occurring with remote access software. Obviously, we've got the infrastructure built for faster internet services, obviously with fiber internet, and of course now with 5G internet. So I think corporations have definitely been pushing employees to work mobile, but I think the challenge now obviously is the right infrastructure in place. And I think you'll start to see more governments, more corporations that push towards that, because if you think of it, it's actually going to save corporations a ton of money if they have people work from home. And I think people are starting to lean towards more of a lax work schedule, not necessarily working your standard 9 to 5 hours, maybe people working whenever they want to. You can definitely see Apple is one of the companies that I know that they have allowed their employees to work from home for an extended period of time. So I don't necessarily think that this is what's considered the new normal. It's basically a sign of things to come. But I think COVID has definitely pushed up that timetable considerably.
Nice.
Yeah, it's rare that you get to test these things at the scale that we've been able to test it, right? Definitely wouldn't advise, going through the suffering that so many have gone through it, and don't want to, mischaracterize the situation. But, it is rare that we get to test new norms at scale. I definitely would, take issue or struggle with, this is the new reality type statements, or this is the new normal. I think normal is a hard term at the best of times. And so I definitely fall into the acceleration camp. I think a lot of these movements, and there's a lot of undercurrents, and you see big tech companies making big, bold statements, or other companies otherwise, right? I think there's a lot of undercurrents when you deal with hiring and talent pools in oversaturated markets like San Francisco or places like that. There's a lot of undercurrents that I think power big statements that we're seeing, that this is, this is the way that the work is going to happen in the future. There's a lot of benefits that have come from working from home that I think we all have an advantage of seeing now. I think we're still on, largely uncharted territory, right? It's a bold thing to say that this is the new normal forever. And kind of building on to, what Loren was saying earlier, we are social beings. I mean, it depends on your personal take on a lot of these issues for sure. But I think there's definitely, consequences to a very isolated society. And if we rush back into isolation and self-preservation at all costs, there are definitely potential, pitfalls within that as well, right? So just kind of echoing some of the comments there, I think it's going to be some middle ground of both. I think it's accelerated a lot of the undercurrents. I think a lot of strategies, pre-COVID were escalated by COVID. I don't think it brought on a lot of new things that didn't exist, and it just exacerbated, a lot of the undercurrents that companies or corporations or things like that were feeling already. And this is kind of that moment for them to kind of capitalize and seize on the timing and kind of push an agenda forward. So I don't think we've seen, the last of that discussion, kind of the work from home policy, something that we're looking at very closely as well, and trying to understand the balance between, happiness, mental, good mental health, good work-life balance. And we've also seen to be transparent, some of the challenges with a pure work from home, right? Work schedules, I think, are getting longer in some respects, right? It's very hard to switch off, right? If you look at the freelance community, or people that have been working in this environment for a long time, have a lot of lessons for us to learn that we can learn from these negative side effects that I don't think we've fully explored. And we're 2 months, 3 months, depending on where you are, into the cycle. So I think there's a lot of unknowns within this as well that I think we need to keep a close eye on. And I wouldn't rush back into, bold statements either which way to say, this is definitively, has to be this way. But I think we'd all agree that the flexibility is great. And we've learned that people can be trusted and should have more autonomy.
Yeah, no, I agree kind of with both of you have said, especially on the acceleration. I think, it depends on, it's kind of to what end, and obviously we don't know where this will end up. Like we're seeing, how do we combat this virus? Will there be other viruses at some point? Will we think about this differently in terms of kind of our safety and our health as well? So I think personally that this is a catalyst, but it could be, categorized as something that is revolutionary, where we are thinking about things differently, where yes, the kind of work from home, for example, like we've never been able to test this at scale. And would we have been able to test this at scale? And so, could that have been another 50, 100 years? At what point will we have been able to? And maybe this is kind of a big moment where people's thinking or their perspectives have permanently shifted, not necessarily to, oh, we have to live this way, but we are able to live this way. I think that's one way of looking at it. Interestingly, from a work from home standpoint, we just over the past couple weeks have been surveying a lot of the professionals across our platforms. And so to what James was saying, actually, so 55 to 60% of professionals are working more than before, 1 to even 10 hours plus. About 15 to 20% of professionals are working more than 10 hours a week more now. And then we also actually surveyed to see what percentage of professionals would like to continue working from home permanently. And we saw a little over half. It was somewhat split, where depending on the state or the industry, we saw tech was about 60%, or actually 65%. You have obviously teachers and educators that only a third of them want to continue working from home permanently. So I think people are realizing that there is this new way of living, whether it's the new normal or the new reality, and we're moving in that direction. It's accelerated, but does it continue to accelerate or not? Is the kind of the question I have.
Those are all really, really interesting points. The next few questions are going to be sort of somewhat tailored to you guys, so you get to speak a bit about your personal expertise and companies you work for. So starting with you, Burton, so you're working sort of with everyday consumers, users of technology in the real world, as it were, as opposed to sort of tech bubbles or the sort of the global perspectives. I was really interested in, like, especially you're talking about communities who didn't necessarily have access to high-speed internet, and at this moment, a lot of the isolation policies obviously focus towards the elderly and those most vulnerable. Have you had any interactions with people who are sort of trying to get to grips with lots of technology for the first time, and sort of what are their stories? What's that been like?
Yeah, definitely. So, like you said, we do deal with consumers, and the types of technology, obviously, that people have embraced have been more of your video chat software, such as Zoom or such as Skype, but also dealing with the elderly, that the community that's most vulnerable, especially elderly that are in long-term care facilities or nursing homes. They've turned more to, I would say, social media. And you've had elderly people embrace social media for quite a while, but I think even more elderly folks are starting to realize that in order to stay in contact with their loved ones that are not able to come into the facilities, that they have turned to social media and gone to tech devices such as your Echo shows or your Google Home shows in order to stay in contact with people. Because the good thing about, let's just take the Amazon and the Google Home devices. They're easy to set up and they're easy to use. They use an activation word, so elderly people can easily embrace those forms of technology as opposed to software on apps and on computers that are a little bit more complicated and for them to embrace. So I think technologies that have been out there, such as your Google Home devices and your Amazon devices, the elderly are starting to take a little bit more advantage of too. Obviously, webcams are a big thing. There's specific brands of webcams that you can't even get anymore. And your elderly audience is going to have more access to a desktop computer, which doesn't necessarily come with the webcam. So webcam sales have gone up a lot. And it's because elderly people have needed to get them in order to stay in contact with their loved ones. So those are the types of technology that I've seen most consumers deal with. Obviously, internet is a technology that's being embraced by everybody. And of course, all of the different video chat software, especially Zoom, because isn't it Zoom is now worth more than a lot of the airline companies that are out there because so many people have embraced that technology. So I think the trend will continue, but at this time, those are the types of technologies that you will see those that are more risk will embrace until this thing pretty much blows over.
Brilliant. I think that's a really interesting point with Zoom vis-a-vis airlines, because it is a form of travel. We're speaking across at least 3 countries here, which is an amazing thing that, though this would have been possible pre-pandemic, just people weren't embracing in that way. And the other,
I was going to add one other thing too, Jack. I think the other thing that we're starting to see as far as trends, I don't know if you necessarily would say trends, would be cybercrime. So cybercrime has definitely picked up, and it obviously puts more people at risk because you have the elderly and you have the uninformed that think that every piece of information that comes through the internet, they need to embrace as far as COVID is concerned. But as we know, cyber criminals are very smart in their tactics and work with social engineering. So we've seen an uptick as far as the amount of people that have been scammed in various ways as far as the COVID-19 crisis is concerned.
That's brilliant. I also was interested by the way that seeing stuff like Google Home and Amazon Echo, which is often presented as like the media interaction of the future, will move the sort of the post-Gutenberg age where we'll start sort of interacting via voice with stuff. But in fact, that's older generations who are sort of retrofitting to it. It's sort of a kind of unexpected shift there. Awesome. Does anyone have anything to add on what you've seen in sort of consumer trends of what people are using, or should I go around with more specific questions?
Yeah, I just say that I think audio or kind of voice interaction, I agree, is something that is. I agree with the older generation, but even with younger generations, is kind of a new way to interact with technology that's continuing to pick up steam, and I think it's going to become more commonplace. You see different even social networks playing with the ability to engage via voice even instead of via video, given the amount of energy it requires to constantly engage through Zoom. There's something called Zoom fatigue at this point, right? And so I think, I just kind of second what you're saying about the audio being this new format. This could be a good catalyst for that as well.
Good to remember in general, just great to hear you, Burton, just talking about, the parts of society that are easily forgotten in, technology, right? Technology skews to younger and, early adopters, and especially, something that the COVID has brought out is, those most vulnerable. And I don't know if there's any, data around the kind of correlation between, the vulnerable and, how connected they are, but it is an interesting thought process, and it's good to hear that people are, working on those things and thinking about it. I know being in technology ourselves, it's just very easy to not even consider those things which should not be forgotten. So that's great to hear.
Yeah. So Loren, with Fishbowl obviously helps lots of professionals make sense of their careers without necessarily jeopardizing their relationships with HR departments. Have you seen the app really take off during this time?
Yeah, so just over the past couple months, our usage has doubled. Maybe not 10x like Zoom, but I think there is this desire to connect with coworkers still, but in a more casual, personal way. And so it has been interesting to see how people are trying to find their own professional communities, whether it's with existing coworkers or with people maybe within their industry. So we're seeing 5th grade teachers connecting with other 5th grade teachers about how to deal with remote learning. We have management consultants within McKinsey chatting with other McKinsey consultants, physicians talking about COVID care with other physicians. So I think there is, as we're more disconnected, one of our theses was a couple of years ago was that the workforce is becoming more and more disconnected than ever before. So, going back to this, revolution or acceleration, there is very much this acceleration happening. And so at this point, we're all disconnected. So yeah, we've definitely seen an increase. And it has been interesting to think about how this kind of work from home and just like being disconnected might even change, finding jobs, for example. These are topics that we've seen people discuss where for the first time, professionals are talking about, moving away from the city and working from, a remote place, but at scale. I think there's always been a cohort of those professionals, but we're seeing many more people talk about that as well.
Fascinating. We spoke briefly about sort of how more and more people will be working from home, whether that will transform sort of society. But what do you think the effect will be on people's careers? How will that shape people's professional developments over the years?
Just the concept of learning and development too within corporations, but even looking at universities, as I think one of you were saying, like, what does education even look like right now in career discovery? It becomes a really large question. On the positive, in terms of how that plays out, I think there are many positive aspects in terms of more of the democratization, as long as you have that fast, high-speed internet connection, where you do have access to learn new skills. You do have the ability to find that job at that elite institution or organization, even if you're working not near a major metro area. And I think for people's careers, they might have more opportunity than before, specifically with maybe different underrepresented populations, especially from a geographic standpoint. Mm-hmm. So I think that's quite interesting. And then from a learning and development standpoint, kind of along the same lines, we're seeing a lot of people come to Fishbowl to get career guidance and advice. How does that start to become more formalized? We've seen, even though ours is more anecdotal and casual career advice, you see LinkedIn has kind of doubled down on some learning tools. You see learning and development platforms or learning management systems really become more used right now within large corporate, enterprise institutions. So yeah, I'm hopeful that this will actually be a positive thing in terms of really democratizing that opportunity. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this plays out, because that's not always how it does play out, unfortunately, if you look at history.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating. So many people do sort of learn so many things on the job, as well as a lot about what the jobs they want to do as well. So
right.
It's very difficult to sort of, everything becomes a sort of individual decision at that point, remote.
Yeah, very much so. That's a good point. I think there's going to be more of this individual focus, and maybe it's less about what company you're working for, but the actual work you're doing then, because there might be less of a connection to that organization. Or how we're talking to large corporations with tens or hundreds of thousands of employees, and how do you create the concept of a corporate community when everyone's kind of remote, and how does that even happen? So those are some of the questions we're seeing asked and trying to solve too.
No, it'll be fascinating to see. James, so SAM is like a crisis monitoring site, or service platform rather. Did you see COVID coming? How did it show up in your systems? Are you even set up to see like a structural shift like that? Does AI understand that?
Yeah, AI is pattern recognition, right? So we spot anomalies and kind of patterns that break the norm. That's everything from everyday things to crime related or a fire or things like that. That is something that it's trained to detect. So it's hard for any crisis event detection platform to kind of put their finger back at the middle of this, because this was first reported as SARS, or first reported as an unknown sort of some sort of anomaly. So there's very early signals that that we saw, a lot of companies saw from social media reports coming out from Wuhan. What's interesting, and I think where data at scale really comes into play, a lot of it is finding the needle in the haystack, and then it's how serious is this problem, and my comments were really around that earlier, around frontline workers or health officials, or people are just generally busy. So it's hard to say, did we see this coming? I think we in reflection all saw this coming. right? Like it's very hard for anybody to say, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. I think pretty much collectively, society and the world knew it, and there's going to be a lot of dissection in the news, and kind of authorities are going to try to now shift to sort of who knew what, when, and what did you do type thing, and we'll see a lot more. We've seen that now. We will see a lot more of it. But by and large, for companies to take an effective response had information available to them. It's a matter of, how serious is this going to be? What are the costs? What's the cost benefit analysis that I need to run for my economy, my country, and things like that? And I think that's where a lot of the real discussion will take place, is not, did we see this coming or not? So, in terms of us, yeah, we definitely saw a lot of early signals very early on. We see a lot of, early signals for a lot of things. And to be honest, some of them, become large scale issues, some do not. And that is the challenge that we face as, a global society. Our problems around the world are problems. Right? Do I need to take these things, seriously? Can I go about my business? And so, yeah, that's perhaps more philosophical than your question was, in terms of, did the platform detect it? But I think that's the honest answer for a lot of, companies that are looking for early signals, trend spotting, crisis event detection. It's easy, after the fact to say, yep, see, I saw it there, and you didn't listen. And we don't think that that's a very constructive conversation. Generally we see a lot of things in our individual lives that we ignore, that are problems that we should probably address. So do governments, so do companies, and so do, a lot of different parts of life and society. So where I think, AI in particular can be, very helpful, is just understanding, what risk vectors are really important to you, and, help with some of the not to kind of distill it down, it's a very complex system, but in a way, just offload a lot of that work that people are too busy to do. It's really that additive layer, that helpful layer. So, for health officials, can we be scanning for anomalies within, testing, blood samples, all the, obviously that brings up a lot of privacy, aspects that we should discuss, but can technology be helpful looking for things we don't know are a problem? And that's kind of how we think about, the COVID situation, or many other situations. Help me look for things I don't know are problems. Help me sift through the noise from what's going on. So kind of touching base on, perhaps a lot of different points there, but for us, that's how we look at it. That's how we help our clients in a noisy world. Where do you best spend your time to try to get ahead of these crisis events as best as you can?
Some really interesting points there. Have you seen more clients coming to you during this time? Are people more interested in sort of managing risks and finding the signal for the next crisis, or is it more like all bets are off now, there's no point looking into the future?
It's a bit of both, right? I think, so we are a B2B company. We sell directly to, our clients. So selling is just harder, right? Budgets are tough. So on that side, I think a lot of businesses, even when you're in technology, it's really hard to say that, I've been untouched by this. I think the impact will be felt pretty large for a lot of businesses. That being said, we definitely count ourselves being, very fortunate. We closed a seed round in the middle of all of this. We've had unprecedented demand and scale for the platform. When you sell crisis event detection solutions and you're in the middle of a crisis, it's not a hard sell. People tend to understand what you do. And it's always a bit of a shame, right? Where, you wish you could have been more prepared. You wish that you had these systems in place. And, there's a lot of those kind of conversations that always happen, but that's just kind of the shift as it happens sometimes with government spending or corporate spending. You tend not to think that you have problems looming around the corner when times are good, and when times are bad is when you invest in the infrastructure that you wish that you would have had. So it's an interesting world that we find ourselves in. We definitely count ourselves as, one of the lucky ones to have gotten funding, customer demand, and interest, but it's not lost on us as to the circumstances and the reasons that we can hopefully help with, going forwards. So it's been a very busy time for us, for sure.
Brilliant. That's interesting. My next question is sort of a kind of sector-wide one, so anyone who's got thoughts do jump in. But it's before the pandemic, technology was getting especially sort of big tech and sort of the softwares and systems that most people are aware of, was getting an increasingly sort of bad rep. Like Facebook was rigging elections, Amazon was destroying labor rights. The next step for the economy and society could be pretty bad. There's going to be huge unemployment. You're going to have sort of erratic stock markets, and people will probably get used to at least I found in my personal life, the sort of the slowness of not having to commute, not expecting to meet loads of people every day, which is sort of a slower world than sort of sped up Silicon Valley ethos. So in that sort of both slow but also precarious situation, how do we think technology and innovation in a sort of general sense can still save the day and move us forwards?
I'll go first on this one. It's almost like we're back in the Stone Ages because we have a lot of time on our hands. And I think in down periods, you have seen the trend that new stuff has become invented. So the good thing is, and I know I've said this multiple times, is that we do have access to high-speed internet. And I think the internet, in my opinion, is considered the great equator, meaning it sets equal ground for everyone. So without the internet, we wouldn't have companies like Amazon or Airbnbs or even Uber Eats. You've got companies that are able to exist, make billions of dollars, and not necessarily have much real estate. So I think you'll see more internet-based jobs. You'll see more home-based jobs that will start to evolve during this period, because as we self-isolate, the country still, or I should say not the country, but the globe still needs to work. So you'll definitely see more innovations that are internet-based pop up, and thankfully the internet will help keep that process churning.
Yeah, I mean, being Canadian, I'll do a shout out to a Canadian company, but Shopify is another company that's doing incredibly well. And just kind of building on your comments there, Burton, right? Like I don't think that we've seen the full extent of it. In a lot of ways, I don't think there's still so much uncapped potential that the internet brings, that we are really just at the cusp of a lot of this in so many ways to kind of power the next generation. Amazon, I'd definitely be a fan of seeing somebody like Shopify do incredibly well and learn. There's always these concepts of maybe the first advantage, the first mover isn't always the best advantage, right? There's a lot of unknowns or pitfalls or things like that come through. But couldn't agree more that the internet is an equalizer. It does mean that as big as Amazon is for certain things, they're not untouchable. Nobody is, and you can have small startups, based in Canada like Shopify, take on giants and slowly grow in valuation that have a much better ethos and much more progressive company in so many more ways than just technology, which is great to see.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, and I think it's up to the companies now to really figure, like, tech, is no longer just one industry. Tech is really part of all industries. You're talking about Uber, it's a logistics company, or transportation. You're talking about some of these like Beyond Meat. Some people even categorize that as tech company. It is technology because it's the pea protein and the future of food. But I think what we're gonna see is we're gonna see some companies do really good things and really support, and other companies focus on maybe their own bottom line and of their own corporation, and maybe not more globally or nationally to support all people. So I think I agree. I actually think before all these tech companies were getting a bad rap, they were actually getting a really good rap. There was this golden era where they were the darling childs of press, and Facebook, this new social network, and Uber, taxi on demand, and I think we realized that maybe they weren't always doing good, and so now there was kind of an anti-tech sentiment. And my take is that right now maybe it'll just be a bit sobered, but there's hope, and I think there will be some companies that come out and do a lot of good, whether it's through connecting us, supporting us, moving technology forward in some ways. So that's my expectation and hope that there will be seen a lot of positive moments, and those will be the things highlighted. But the negative moments will also be highlighted if they need to be, and they should be called out.
I was going to add, guys, that I think one of the things that needs to definitely happen in this pandemic is that more companies that are not quote unquote tech savvy need to really embrace technology in order to help their businesses survive, because there's a lot of brick and mortar businesses that are going to be affected, but at the same time, they don't necessarily have to be affected by the pandemic. I know there are some businesses that have just shuttered because they think, say, the restaurant experience or the workout experience is only something that can be done in the real world. But if you look at, again, DoorDash, Uber Eats, even like with some of the grocery stores like Walmart that offers shopping where groceries are delivered to your door, or even if you look at Peloton, as far as their whole system is concerned, I mean, you basically have a fitness gym that is in your living room. Obviously, you're buying the $2,000 bike, but at the same time, it's technologies like that that traditional brick and mortar businesses can embrace to help their businesses survive. And I would love to see more of these businesses become more educated rather than just throwing in the towel, thinking that old schools of thought of, well, we're done because we can't get customers in the door. There's ways that the internet can definitely help those businesses thrive. So I hope we see more education in that aspect, whether it's, embracing web design, embracing social media, just that innovation that's going to allow them to thrive in this period, because we don't know how long this is going to last. It could last to the end of the year. It could be 2022 before this is all over. So that's what I would love to see as far as innovation is concerned.
Oh, totally. I think there's a bit of it's a double-edged sword, but I agree with you, because there's a local bakery, and just as the pandemic was happening and, we knew things were going to shut down, things weren't shut down yet. I know the owner, and I was saying, hey, have you thought about delivery? There are these platforms that can help you deliver. And, they weren't yet adopting it. And I was trying to say, like, hey, you really should look into this. And, many, small businesses have been able to stay alive through some of that. But then at the same time, I actually more recently learned that some of these delivery companies, there was someone that posted, that they sold $1,000 of goods, of food. And what they ended up with was $350 out of what they sold, because of after all of those fees, they're ending up with so little. And so I think this where I didn't understand that, because I wasn't that small business owner either. And so, I hope, yes, they adopt technology, but then I still think it's on the technology companies to understand who are they supporting and not trying to take advantage too much. And that's, where I still think, okay, it's up to the companies to decide, are they going to be the good guys or the bad guys?
But I also think it has to go down to the business owner as well, because yes, you can utilize a service like DoorDash or Uber Eats, but at the same time, you can use the power of your website and your social media. And let's just say it's, summertime. You've got college kids, high school kids that aren't really doing anything and they've got to earn a living. Why not have them do the deliveries rather than using a third-party service?
For sure, but then it comes down to, I think, the access and distribution. And I think that a lot of these larger companies are starting to own those distribution points and that access, that attention. The same way that most publishers get most of their traffic from Facebook now. They don't, maybe New York Times gets that direct traffic, but the others don't.
Right.
And so I hear what you're saying. I want that to be the case. It's going back, 10, 15 years where, but these larger companies, the same way, Amazon, Walmart, the same way that, Walmart was encroaching on physical spaces. I think some of these large tech companies are going to encroach or make it difficult for smaller companies to come in and do it their own way. But I definitely hear what you're saying, though, too.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting debate. I'm not sure if anyone saw, but there was an amazing Substack piece of a guy who, his friend ran a pizza joint, and they basically found out that DoorDash had signed up his friend's pizza parlor without the owner knowing. And then they used that they basically figured out DoorDash were using that as a way of just like trying to prove how many sales they could make. So they were doing them at cheaper prices and then paying at full price.
Wow. Yeah.
So this guy just ordered like 1,000 pizzas and made his friend hundreds and hundreds of dollars for months and months. And months. Because of course, like these big companies, they're funded purely by venture capital. So the actual, like, is it their cash they're burning when they just like do these promotions? And it completely, as you were pointing out, Loren, it completely twists the market and the real economics, because it should be what Burton's saying. Like, if a small business owner can hire a college kid to do his delivery, it shouldn't be any more or less profitable for them than the same company going through a third-party system. But the
Right.
sort of the top-level economics are kind of twisted.
Right. It's all about owning the market as quickly as possible now.
Mm.
And back to the question of like, is technology getting a bad rap? I think it is very company specific, right? And I think it is, it goes back to, depends on its use case, and it's all about how it's being used. But the consistent part through all of this is it's the ability to tear down, moats or kind of, unfair market advantages where it used to be location based. Like I needed to have access to resources. I need to be close to a river or whatever it would be. There would be these advantages, and there's a continual erosion from how quickly we even forget ourselves. And, okay, you can't take on Facebook, you can't take on Amazon. They are the established players, and can't take on Uber and things like that. So it is interesting that is a massive undercurrent that I think, technology shouldn't necessarily get a bad rap. It definitely has a lot of ways it can go wrong, and it should be, kept a close eye on many levels. But that's the wave I think that's getting excited, just how easier things are becoming, even getting easier to code, to getting easier to build things where you used to have a platform. And it's, it takes a lot of initiative to kind of, be a small business and say, okay, I'm going to do this myself if I'm not going to go with a platform that I don't like the fees on. But it is getting easier to do that, right? Continually. And I think that's just what gets me really excited about all of this, and by and large, right? Like, it will be just easier for an end user to build their own websites. And that's still like the barrier to entry for simple things that a lot of us take for granted are still big hurdles that will just get easier and easier to go direct and take control.
Definitely. Once a quick round robin, sort of like, if you could name one product, one software, one service that you think is going to like really take off, or something that you're really excited about that's just been sort of launched or devised recently, and it obviously can't be Zoom, what would it be?
Mine would be and I don't know how you guys feel about this, the whole COVID tracking apps, because we've got to get this virus under control. The challenge is that you can't have people on the streets tracking people as far as if they've got the disease or not. So the venture with Google and Apple coming out with the API to allow people to self-report from their smartphones. I would love if more communities around the world would embrace that. I mean, obviously there's the whole privacy issue that could come into play, but I think ultimately we are going to have to develop a system where we can actually track, where the virus is. So that is something that I would be happy to see developed a little bit more during this crisis.
Yeah, especially at least in the US, it's fascinating because in China, they had that in place pretty quickly, and it was 100% of the population pretty quickly based off of the cell phones. But yeah, I definitely agree there.
I'm a software guy, but generally a lot of software gets me excited. I think what's brought to light in all of this too is my reinvigorated love for a lot of hardware startups that are out there, especially around the testing capabilities and things like that. I think there's just a lot of really exciting things that I hope from this pandemic. We see a lot more home testing kits for various things, right? I don't think this is, if you talk to health professionals, they were just waiting for a pandemic to happen. We'll probably wait for the next one. These things are not new to humanity. So being smarter around, how we can get ahead of the bottlenecks within the system, I think are really exciting. I don't know who's going to be the companies, whether that's an Apple pushing into health more, or a new player coming onto the scene. So it's hard to kind of back a horse in that particular race. But as a trend, what I would be really excited about as a consumer, right, is just being able to take some of that power back into my own home to say, okay, here's what I know about myself. Here's what I know about my family. I know my risk profile, my exposure profile. Am I being a problem to society? Can I be helpful? I think getting quicker to the fundamental questions of those things with technology, I think would really excite me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because you then, even regardless of what the disease or what the pandemic is, healthcare becomes a new priority. So I think you're very right in thinking about healthcare.
We don't have these universal health records where across state lines, physicians are calling other physicians, or another hospital. It's like, hey, can you give me the background on this patient? And we don't even have that. Yeah, I totally agree with you, James. And it kind of gets to what you were saying too, Burton, just like being able to track a lot of this. Yeah, for me, I guess it's less about a specific technology right now, but the potential for the innovation in education. I just think there's so much potential there. I'm really fascinated about what's going to happen. I think this is a really big catalyst in terms of what it's going to do. Yeah, people that now have access to learn, they're given new opportunities. What does that mean for these MBA programs where you have to pay $100,000 per year to network with people more than even what you're learning necessarily? Although it is obviously a great education, are people valuing that the same way? And so for me, yeah, I think kind of this democratization around education, but also what does that look like? What does the future of education look like? And could this be a catalyst for that? So I'm really fascinated with that.
Loren, I'm glad you brought up the whole education aspect because I'm a component of well, I guess I might as well just say free education. Apps like Khan Academy and a lot of the homeschooling apps really excite me because I know my wife and I, we homeschool our boys, and there's a program called Acellus where they can basically interact with their instructor through their iPad and go through a whole school year's worth of education. But at the same time, one of the problems that has to be solved is rural communities and the internet. I think once that occurs, then it will be a great equalization of education to everyone. Because I think Khan Academy's motto is free education for everyone. And I would love to see that because I think that there is a social divide when it comes to technology and education. I mean, it's, the digital divide. And I would love to see that be eradicated globally because that would definitely uplift the human race and just help us achieve better and bigger things together. But that definitely needs to, I agree with you 100%, Loren, that definitely needs to happen. And I think with COVID, we're going to see a lot of that solved. But at the same time, I think the challenge is that you would have to see education institutions hop on board because what happens in the fall when it comes to back to school time? Are districts going to be forgiving to parents and to students that don't want to interact in the classroom? Exactly. Are they going to present ways where they can take courses online so that they can keep up with their peers? I mean, that problem needs to be solved this summer. Yeah. Because, the school year is coming.
Yeah, there's a societal component to it as well, for sure. It's not just can you get access to the information, it's what support and where and how is that being distributed. Totally agree.
Great. And that's most of the questions. And we're sort of coming up to the hour mark now. But I think that's been a really kind of optimistic conversation, which is really, really useful and sometimes quite rare at these times. So thank you all so much.
It'll be hard to get three technologists in a room to find pessimism within technology, perhaps.